Right. Okay, let's get into this. We spend billions, right? Billions trying to lift nations out of poverty.
Yeah, huge amounts.
And we see the problems. They seem obvious enough. Lack of resources, infrastructure that's crumbling.
Institutions that just don't work.
Exactly. And then there's corruption. It feels like it's everywhere. And well, despite all that effort, the progress, it often feels just heartbreakingly slow.
Yeah, like pushing a boulder uphill sometime.
Or pouring water into a leaky bucket, It's frustrating.
And for the authors of the book we're looking at today, The Prosperity Paradox, this isn't just like an academic exercise.
Yeah.
They felt this stuff personally. Clayton Christensen, he saw the poverty in South Korea back in the 70s. Really devastating stuff.
He talks about impossible choices families had to make.
Yeah, losing friends to illnesses that should have been preventable.
Mhm.
And Efosa Ojomoh, one of the co-authors, he's from Nigeria, he brings his own experiences too. It underscores that these aren't abstract numbers. They're real human struggles.
That personal angle, it really gives their work an edge, doesn't it? They weren't just analyzing poverty graphs.
No, they wanted to understand how countries actually get prosperous, especially starting from really, really difficult circumstances.
And what they found, which is what we're going to dig into here, it really pushes back against the standard way we think about development.
Totally. So our mission for this deep dive is basically to pull out the most, surprising ideas from their work, the things that maybe feel a bit counterintuitive.
Because they argue that, our usual methods or conventional wisdom, it might be missing the mark.
A lot of the time, yeah.
Okay, so the core idea we need to unpack is this tension. Why focusing on fixing the broken stuff, pushing things from the outside, why that often falls short.
Right, and what they propose instead.
Which, as a preview, is pretty radical. It's less about pushing resources in and more about unlocking potential that's already there through something they call internal market creation. It's a big shift in thinking.
It really is. So let's start with that conventional approach you mentioned, the one they call the push strategy.
Yeah.
What does that typically involve?
Well, it's what we've seen for decades, isn't it? It's about pushing things into a country. Foreign aid, for example.
Loads of aid money, yeah.
And pushing big infrastructure projects, building schools, hospitals, roads.
Trying to set up institutions too, right?
Yeah.
Legal systems, governance, often based on Western models.
Exactly. It's this huge top-down effort to fix the problems you can see.
But the book gives some pretty stark examples of why this push, even with the best intentions, often doesn't lead to sustainable change.
Yeah, they mentioned that effort to push toilets in India, just providing the hardware, the toilets themselves.
It wasn't enough. It didn't address the underlying reasons why people weren't using them or couldn't maintain them.
Right, and that image they paint of, like abandoned projects,
Right.
It's pretty depressing. Brand new buildings just falling apart.
Roads crumbling because there's no system, no money, no reason really to maintain them.
Their point is these pushed resources, they just don't stick. The local ecosystem, the market, it isn't ready to support them. There's no organic demand pulling them in.
No pull, which leads right to their alternative. If pushing isn't the answer, what is?
So they looked at economies that did transform. Japan, South Korea, even the U.S. way back when.
And newer examples, too, from Africa, Latin America, Asia. They looked for a different pattern.
And they argue there is a different process, one driven by what they call the pull strategy. And it's all about innovation.
Okay, this is where it gets really fascinating. Their core idea is that lasting prosperity, the kind that lifts whole nations, it's usually sparked by market-creating innovations.
Market-creating innovations. Let's break that down. What makes an innovation market-creating?
Well, it starts with seeing something they call non-consumption.
Non-consumption. Okay.
And this isn't just about people being poor, though that's often related. It's about people who, for whatever reason, can't use an existing product or service. Maybe it's way too expensive. Or it's too complicated to use. Or, and this is key, it just doesn't actually solve the real problem they have. What Christensen famously calls their job to be done.
The job to be done, right? Like the newspaper example. I don't buy it because I'm in a certain demographic.
Right.
I buy it because maybe I need something to do on the plane, or maybe I don't want to talk to the person next to me.
Exactly. The job is creating that little social shield, or just passing the time. Non-consumption happens when existing stuff doesn't do the real job for loads of people.
Okay, got it. So non-consumption is where people are just going without.
Precisely. And here's the twist. Non-consumption isn't a dead end. It's actually a massive signal of opportunity.
How so?
Because it means there's a widespread struggle out there, maybe affecting millions, just waiting for a better solution. And if you create something for these non-consumers,
You're not fighting established companies for their customers.
exactly, you're often competing against, well, nothing, or people just making do. Or, as they put it, you're competing against apathy.
So it's different from just making a slightly cheaper phone or a faster car. That's what they call efficiency innovation, right?
Right. Efficiency innovations tweak existing markets. They're important. They can make companies more profitable.
But they don't usually create the huge numbers of new jobs, especially local jobs, that you need to really lift a whole country.
That's the argument. Market creation does that. Because to serve non-consumers, you usually have to innovate the whole business model.
How do you make it radically affordable? How do you make it simple enough? How do you even get it to people who might live far from cities?
That's the engine. Figuring that out creates this whole ripple effect of economic activity.
Yeah.
Jobs, suppliers, distributors.
Okay, this sounds good in theory. This pull strategy, market creation. Where has it actually worked? They give examples, right?
Oh, yeah. And some might surprise you. They start with the United States, back in the 19th century.
The U.S. We don't usually think of the U.S. as needing this kind of development.
Not now, no. But back then, life was brutal for most people. They cite life expectancy around 45. Infant mortality was horrific, maybe 200 deaths per 1,000 births, no indoor plumbing for most. Cities were apparently just choked with filth, sewage, garbage, horse manure everywhere. It was grim.
Hard to imagine. So how did the U.S. pull itself out of that?
According to the authors, through market-creating innovations. Think about Isaac Singer and the sewing machine.
Ah, okay. Before that, making clothes was incredibly laborious or expensive to buy.
Right. Singer made it possible for ordinary families, millions of them, to make their own clothes affordably. That created a massive new market, pulling economic activity right into people's homes.
Or Eastman Kodak.
Yeah, George Eastman. Photography was this complex, costly thing for professionals only.
Right. Big plates, chemicals.
Exactly. Eastman targeted everyone else, the non-consumers. He made cameras simple, affordable. You push the button, we do the rest. Created a huge new market for personal memories.
And the classic one, Henry Ford, the Model T.
Can't talk about market creation without Ford. Cars were toys for the rich. Ford's genius wasn't just the assembly line.
It was the whole model, making it affordable for his own workers.
Exactly. Creating this gigantic new market for personal transport.
And this is where that pull idea clicks into place with infrastructure.
Yeah, they reference Earl Swift's book on roads. When the Model T took off, suddenly millions of people had cars.
But the roads were terrible, mostly dirt tracks, right?
Barely improved at all. Only about 8% had any improvement in 1909. Concrete roads, almost non-existent.
So the demand for the cars
Pulled the demand for better roads. People wanted to use their cars. That created the political will and the economic mechanism through taxes and fees on gas and cars to actually build the infrastructure needed. The market came first, then pulled the roads.
That's fascinating. It flips the usual build it and they will come idea.
Completely. They also mentioned A.P. Giannini.
Bank of Italy, which became Bank of America.
Right. Back then, banks mostly served the wealthy. Giannini focused on the little fellows, immigrants, workers, farmers, people ignored by the big banks.
Non-consumers of banking services.
Exactly. He created a new market, democratizing access to savings loans, reached millions.
Okay, so the U.S., what about other places? Japan after World War II.
Devastated.
Yo.
Totally battered. But companies like Sony didn't just rebuild old industries. They invented new markets. Things like electric heated cushions, apparently.
Really?
Yeah. And then the Walkman, obviously. Products aimed squarely at ordinary Japanese consumers, creating demand from scratch.
And Toyota. You mentioned them.
Classic example. Didn't start by trying to beat Ford at luxury cars. They started with bikes, then basic trucks.
Then cars like the Corolla, built for Japan's roads at the time, which weren't great.
Exactly. Built for people who needed simple, reliable transport, non-consumers of the fancy imports.
And focusing on that mass market.
Pulled everything else along. Manufacturing jobs, sales, service jobs. They even had to invest heavily in a driving school because suddenly you had all these first-time car owners who needed to learn.
So the market needs pulled the training infrastructure.
That's the pattern they see.
And South Korea is maybe the most striking modern case.
Yeah.
Poorest country in the world territory in the 60s.
Poorer than North Korea, per capita GDP-wise back then. Hard to believe now.
And now an economic powerhouse. How did that happen?
Companies like Kia started making bicycle parts, then cheap motorcycles, then these little three-wheeled utility vehicles that were everywhere, then passenger cars, always targeting the affordable end, the non-consumers first.
Building up capability, building the market.
And Samsung, from a small trading firm to, well, Samsung, a huge chunk of the entire country's GDP now. Electronics, construction, insurance, serving the needs of a growing domestic market.
What about that steel company, Efosa? You mentioned them building a school.
Yeah, that's a perfect example of the pull. They needed highly skilled engineers and technicians for their advanced steel mills.
And the education system couldn't provide them.
Not at the scale or quality they needed. So they didn't just wait or complain. They built their own world-class technical university, Peace Tech. The market need for skilled labor was so intense, it literally pulled a top-tier university into existence.
Okay, so those are the big national stories. But the book also has more recent company-specific examples, right?
Loads of them, like MicroInsure. They saw this huge gap. Low-income people had basically zero access to insurance.
So one emergency, like a hospital visit.
Could push a whole family back into extreme poverty. A massive unserved need. Non-consumption again.
So what did MicroInsure do?
Their innovation wasn't just the insurance product, it was the delivery. They partnered with mobile phone companies.
Leveraging something people already use.
Exactly. They offered simple insurance, often bundled free with buying mobile airtime. Registration was just like 3 text message questions. Super simple.
They had to overcome apathy, right? People just didn't think insurance was for them.
Totally. They tell a story about learning from a woman whose family faced ruin after a hospital bill. That focused them on the real job, providing a safety net that was incredibly easy to access and understand.
So they refined it.
Yeah, offering small, fast payouts via mobile money, like $50 for a short hospital stay. Seems tiny to us, maybe.
But potentially life-changing for someone on the edge.
Exactly. And by cracking that code for non-consumers, they've reached tens of millions and are profitable in most markets.
What about Iguanafix in Argentina, the home repair platform?
Fascinating case. Argentina has a big informal economy, lots of contractors working off the books, hard to regulate.
So how did Iguanafix formalize them? Not by force, obviously.
No, by incentive. They offered these informal contractors access to a really attractive new market. Corporate clients, big companies needing reliable repair services.
So steady work, potentially better pay.
Right. But to get access to those clients via Iguanafix, the contractors had to register formally, pay taxes, get insurance, operate transparently.
So the market opportunity pulled them into the formal system.
Precisely. The profit motive achieved what rules and penalties couldn't. It literally made honesty and formality profitable for them.
That's clever. And Tolaram in Nigeria, with the noodles.
Yeah, Indomie noodles, hugely popular. Tolaram's business selling those and other consumer goods grew so big.
They ran into Nigeria's infrastructure problems, power cuts, bad ports.
Exactly. Unreliable power, congested ports, difficult distribution. It was strangling their growth.
So what did they do? Push the government?
They basically had to build their own infrastructure, their own power plants, their own port terminal, their own logistics network.
That sounds incredibly expensive.
It was a huge upfront investment, but it was pulled in by the massive market demand for their products. They needed it to keep growing to serve their customers.
And it became sustainable.
Yes, and eventually even profitable in its own right because they could sell power or port services to other companies too. It created thousands of jobs, all pulled in by that initial market creation.
It's a powerful example. The book mentions others too, right? M-Pesa, Nollywood.
Yeah, M-Pesa, mobile money in Kenya totally transformed finance for non-consumers. Nollywood, the Nigerian film industry, created a huge market by making films reflecting local culture and stories, unlike Hollywood imports.
Moringa Connect in agriculture, water solutions like Manila Water.
Safe water network, too. Even recycling programs like Mercado de Truc in Argentina, swapping recyclables for food vouchers. The principle applies across so many sectors.
Okay, this brings us to maybe the most challenging part of their argument. The whole idea about institutions and corruption.
Right. The conventional wisdom is you have to fix the institutions first. You need rule of law, you need to stamp out corruption, then development can happen. It's seen as step one.
But the authors say, maybe that's backwards.
Pretty much. They argue corruption often isn't the root problem. It's more like a workaround, a solution people hire when the official systems are just too slow, too complex, or don't deliver.
So it's driven by people just trying to get things done or, benefit themselves when the formal way doesn't work.
Yeah, it taps into pretty basic human motivations. And they argue that strong institutions, like rule of law or good governance, they tend to emerge from a society's values and, crucially, its economic needs. You can't just import them easily.
They mention post-communist countries,
Yeah.
like Romania or Hungary.
Yeah, adopted brand new constitutions, democratic frameworks, but still struggled massively with corruption for a long time. Because just changing the rules on paper didn't change the underlying incentives or culture overnight.
That Venice example is interesting too. Trade came first.
That's the idea. Venice became this huge center for lucrative long-distance trade. That created a powerful merchant class.
And they needed systems to manage that trade. Contracts, resolving disputes.
Exactly. So they used their wealth and influence to create the institutions they needed, parliaments, commercial courts, things like the Culliganza partnership structure. The booming market pulled the institutional development.
So the argument is, create thriving, accessible formal markets first.
And that changes the incentives. When participating in the formal market becomes more profitable and easier than navigating the informal or corrupt ways.
People shift, like the iguanafix contractors.
That's the mechanism. It makes transparency and following the rules the rational economic choice. They mentioned Roshan, the telecom in Afghanistan, thriving despite incredible challenges by operating transparently because the market demand was so strong.
So institutions get stronger because the market rewards it, not just because someone decreed it,
Right,
which loops back to infrastructure again.
Exactly. If you just push a fancy road or port into a place where there's no real market demand pulling it.
It's likely to fail. Cost overruns, no maintenance budget.
Yeah, it's incredibly hard. They point out even the U.S. gets a D+ grade on its infrastructure and needs trillions in repairs. Maintenance is tough even for rich countries.
But when the infrastructure is pulled in,
By a market-creating innovation, yeah. Ford needing roads, Toll-Ram needing power, POSCO needing a technical school.
it's tied to a living, breathing economic activity that needs it and can sustain it.
And that often means, especially in quarter countries, companies have to vertically integrate. They have to build their own power, their own training, their own logistics, because reliable external options just aren't there.
Seems like a burden.
It's a cost up front, definitely. But the authors argue that when it's pulled by the market, it's sustainable. It can even become a separate profit center later, serving others. Context really matters.
Okay, let's try and wrap this up then. The prosperity paradox. This puzzle of why poverty hangs on despite so much effort.
The authors say it exists because we've been pulling the wrong levers, focusing on pushing resources, fixing symptoms from the outside.
And the alternative, the prosperity process, is different. It's about constantly looking for that non-consumption.
Yeah, finding those widespread struggles where people aren't being served, and then creating new markets, new business models to solve those struggles in ways that are affordable and accessible.
So the big takeaway is, prosperity is more often pulled into existence by these new markets, rather than pushed from the outside by aid or reforms alone.
That's the core message. The potential isn't missing in poor countries. It's latent. It's hidden in the unmet needs of their own people, the non-consumers.
Which puts a huge emphasis on local entrepreneurs, doesn't it? People who actually live there and understand the struggles firsthand.
Absolutely. They're the ones best placed to spot the opportunities and figure out how to build businesses that create jobs and value from the ground up.
It really makes you rethink things. Maybe the answer to some problems isn't another NGO program, but finding that market-creating innovation. Like the Wright brothers needing balance, not just power. Or figuring out how to deliver basic health care to millions, not just building another hospital.
Finding a different way to do the job, one that can actually scale. It's a compelling framework. Want prosperity. Help people build businesses that serve the unserved.
So a final thought for everyone listening. As you look around, maybe at challenges in your own community or globally, what if we shifted perspective? What if we saw those struggles not just as problems needing aid, but as signals of potential market-creating innovations just waiting to be discovered? Where might those seeds of sustainable prosperity be hiding in